Naomi Carter sat at the long polished table, trying to steady her breathing. The private restaurant was lit with golden lamps, the kind that made everything look richer than it was. She had spent the whole day preparing herself, telling her reflection in the mirror that tonight would be about family, about connection, about maybe, just maybe feeling like she belonged at that table. Her husband, David, sat across from her, calm and collected as always. At 41, he wore his success like a second skin, sharp suit, sharper smile, and a confidence that made people lean in when he spoke. His parents flanked him like loyal guards. His mother's pearls gleamed under the light, and his father kept his nose high as if the air itself was beneath him. Their teenage children sat between them, one scrolling on his phone under the table, the other picking at her food. Naomi reached for her glass of water. Her hand trembled slightly, though she forced a smile. "It's nice we could all come together tonight," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. The waiter set down another round of dishes, the kind Naomi could barely pronounce but knew David's family adored. Conversation floated around her in fragments. David's father talking about stocks, his mother making a snide remark about a neighbor, her children giggling quietly at something she wasn't part of. Naomi nodded, smiled, kept her posture straight. She had learned to survive these dinners by being invisible. But tonight something felt different. A chill crawled up her spine. Though the restaurant was warm, she told herself she was imagining it, that the unease was just her nerves playing tricks. She was wrong. Without warning, David set down his fork with a quiet clink. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a stack of papers, and slid them across the table. The sound of the folder scraping against the wood cut through the room like a blade. Naomi froze. Her fingers hovered above the papers but didn't touch. She looked at him, her brows knitting together. "What's this?" His voice was cold, stripped of every trace of tenderness she once knew. "It's time, Naomi. I'm filing for divorce." The words landed heavier than the papers themselves. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. Divorce. At this table. In front of his parents. In front of their children. She glanced at her kids. Their eyes were wide, filled with confusion. Her son looked down quickly, pretending to focus on his plate. Her daughter bit her lip, glancing between her parents as if the room had cracked open beneath them. And then Naomi saw it, his mother's smirk, subtle but sharp, curling at the edge of her lips like she had been waiting for this moment, like she had known all along. Naomi's hand finally touched the papers. The edges were cold against her skin. She felt her chest tighten, her pulse hammering in her ears. Humiliation burned hot in her throat, but stronger than that was the sting of betrayal. 15 years of her life reduced to legal documents. 15 years of sacrifice turned into a spectacle at a dinner table. Her hand trembled as she pulled the papers closer. Not because she was weak, but because rage was fighting to break free. She lifted her head slowly, her eyes sweeping across the table. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint clinking of cutlery as the waiter refilled a glass, unaware that a war had just begun. Naomi's lips curved into a calm, almost serene smile. Her voice was low, steady, but inside her words roared like fire. At that table, she thought, they believed they ended me. But that was the night I decided to end them. 15 years together. That was how long Naomi Carter had been married to David. In those years, she had given him everything she had. Her time, her love, her patience. She stood by his side as he worked his way up from a junior associate to one of the most respected corporate lawyers in the city. While David built his reputation, Naomi built their home. She raised their 2 children, made sure birthdays were celebrated, and turned every house they lived in into a place that felt warm and safe. She carried the family quietly, the way pillars hold up a building. Unseen but essential. David came from money. His parents owned businesses, wore their pride like armor, and lived in a world where appearances mattered more than feelings. From the start, they made it clear that Naomi was not their kind of woman. She had grown up in a modest neighborhood, the daughter of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. She had worked hard to study architecture at university, dreaming of designing beautiful buildings one day. But when she married David, his parents barely tried to hide their disapproval. To them, she was a burden their son had chosen, not a blessing. His mother, in particular, was sharp and manipulative. She had a way of speaking that always carried a sting, wrapped in polite smiles. "Naomi," "You really should think about going back to work," she would say, as if Naomi were lazy instead of tirelessly caring for her children. Or, "David deserves a wife who can match his ambition," as if being a full-time mother was worth nothing. David rarely defended her. He would shift uncomfortably, sometimes change the subject, but he never stood firmly on her side. Over the years, Naomi learned to swallow the hurt and stay silent. She had given up her career in architecture soon after their first child was born. At first, she told herself it was only temporary, that she would return once the children were older. But time slipped away. 1 year turned into 5, 5 turned into 10, and soon she realized her dreams were packed away in a box at the back of the closet, gathering dust. She poured all of her energy into her family instead. But deep inside, a small ache grew louder with every passing year. Naomi was intelligent, but most people overlooked her. They saw the quiet woman who stood in the background at events, not the sharp mind that once designed entire buildings on paper. Even David began to treat her as if she were just part of the furniture. Useful, dependable, but unremarkable. The signs of betrayal had started slowly. At first, it was the late nights at the office, which Naomi excused as normal for a lawyer. Then came the secretive texts, the way David's phone never left his side. Even at dinner, he grew more distant, his eyes glazing over when she spoke, his answers short and distracted. Naomi's instincts whispered that something was wrong, but she kept silencing them. She told herself she was imagining things, that marriage always had rough patches, that David was just stressed. Still, the gap between them widened. When Naomi reached for his hand in bed, he turned away. When she tried to talk about their future, he brushed her off. The man who once charmed her with his ambition now felt like a stranger sharing her roof. The worst part was the way their children seemed to lean more toward him. David was the fun parent, the one who took them on trips, bought them expensive gifts, and told them what they wanted to hear. Naomi was the steady parent, the one who reminded them to do homework, the one who said no when it mattered. Slowly, she noticed how their teenage eyes lit up more when their father entered the room. They laughed harder at his jokes. They sat closer to him on the couch. Naomi often felt like a shadow, watching her own family carry on, as if she were just an extra piece in their lives. Her world grew smaller and lonelier. She no longer had a career. She no longer had her husband's affection. Even her role as a mother felt shaky, as if she were losing her children to him too. She tried to hold on, to pretend everything was fine, but late at night, when the house was quiet, she would sit in the dark and wonder, who am I, if not their wife, their mother, their support? The truth was cruel but clear. Naomi had spent 15 years building everyone else's life, and now she had nothing left to call her own. She was standing on the edge of losing everything: her marriage, her children, and even her own identity. And yet, buried beneath the pain, there was something else. Something she didn't fully see yet. A quiet strength, waiting for its moment. The divorce papers weren't just about separation. David was suing Naomi for full custody of their children. He also wanted the family house, the very place Naomi had poured her soul into for 15 years. The words on the papers were brutal. They painted her as unstable, as if she were some broken woman unfit to raise her own kids. Naomi's eyes moved over the cold legal language, her stomach twisting. She couldn't believe what she was reading. Custody. The house. Her entire life. David hadn't just decided to leave her. He wanted to erase her. She looked up slowly, her eyes landing first on her children. Their faces were pale, confused. Her son stared at his plate as if hoping the world would disappear. Her daughter chewed her lip nervously, her eyes darting between her parents. Naomi's heart cracked at the sight. They didn't understand what was happening, and she couldn't explain it here. Then her gaze shifted to David. He leaned back in his chair, smug and confident, as if this was just another case he was winning in court. His jaw was firm, his hands steady. He had planned this moment, down to the smallest detail. And then there was his mother. The smirk on her face had widened into something cruel. She looked like a queen who had finally won the game, watching her enemy fall. Naomi felt the weight of the entire table pressing down on her. David's cold betrayal, his parents' satisfaction, her children's silent confusion. Inside her chest, rage burned hot, humiliation mixed with pain, and for a moment she thought she might scream, flip the table, or tear the papers in half. But then something inside her shifted. A new kind of calm washed over her. Not peace, but power. She placed her hand gently on the papers. Her fingers didn't tremble this time. She lifted them, folded them once, and tucked them back into the folder. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost graceful. She didn't sign. She didn't shout. She didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Not tonight." That was all she said. Then she pushed back her chair, stood up, and walked out of the restaurant. The night air outside hit her like a slap. Cold, sharp, real. Naomi kept walking, her heels clicking against the pavement, her hands clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay there another second. By the time she reached her car, her body gave in. She leaned against the door, her breath shaking, and finally let the tears come. Sobs racked through her, heavy and raw. The betrayal cut so deep it felt like she was bleeding inside. The man she had loved, the man she had built her life with, had turned her into an enemy. His parents had cheered him on. Even her children had looked at her with confusion, not trust. For a few minutes, Naomi let herself fall apart. She cried for the years she had lost, for the sacrifices she had made, for the woman she used to be. She cried until there was nothing left, until her throat was sore and her chest ached. And then in the stillness of that breakdown, something happened. Her tears slowed. Her breathing steadied. A strange clarity filled her mind. She saw the truth as clearly as the moon hanging above the city. David thought she was weak. His family thought she was disposable. They all underestimated her. They believed they could strip away her children, her home, her dignity, and leave her with nothing. They thought she would crumble quietly, too broken to fight back. But Naomi wasn't broken. Not yet. Beneath the pain was a fire she hadn't felt in years. She realized that this wasn't just about divorce. It wasn't just about papers and property. This was war. And she wasn't planning to lose. Naomi consulted an old college friend, Rachel. They hadn't spoken much over the years, but Naomi remembered Rachel's sharp mind and fearless attitude back when they were both students. Rachel had gone on to become a successful lawyer, known for her tough style in court. Naomi sat across from her in a small office, her hands gripping a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Rachel listened carefully as Naomi explained everything. David's divorce papers, the custody battle, the lies written about her being unstable. When Naomi finished, Rachel leaned back in her chair, her expression serious. "This isn't going to be easy," Rachel said gently. "David has money, connections, and a family willing to back him up. He's already ahead in this fight." Naomi's chest tightened. "So you're saying I'll lose?" Rachel shook her head. "I didn't say that. I'm saying you'll need to be stronger than you've ever been. This case will be brutal, Naomi. But if you're ready to fight, I'll stand with you." For the first time in days, Naomi felt a flicker of hope. She nodded slowly. "I'm ready." The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of Naomi's life. Rachel began digging into David's background, while Naomi gathered what little she could from her side. The more they uncovered, the more Naomi realized how little she had known about her husband. There were bank accounts Naomi had never heard of, hidden under different names. Money flowing in and out, amounts too large to ignore. There were whispers from inside his firm. Rumors of David having affairs with colleagues, of long nights that had nothing to do with legal work. And then there were documents Rachel managed to trace, showing questionable transfers that hinted at something darker. Shady dealings with client funds. Naomi's heart pounded as the evidence piled up. This wasn't just a man trying to end a marriage. This was a man with dangerous secrets. And he was willing to destroy her to keep them hidden. At home, things grew worse. The children, once her comfort, began slipping from her grasp. David spent more time with them, showering them with gifts and promises. Naomi could see the way he was shaping their thoughts, turning them against her bit by bit. One evening, after a long day of digging through files, Naomi tried to sit with her daughter on the couch. She smiled gently, hoping for a moment of closeness, but her daughter pulled away, her eyes cold. "Dad says you don't deserve us," she blurted out. The words hit Naomi like a blade to the chest. She couldn't speak at first, couldn't even breathe. She wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that she had sacrificed everything for them. But all she managed was a whisper. "Is that what you believe?" Her daughter looked uncertain for a moment, but said nothing. Then she stood up and walked away. Naomi sat there in silence, the sound of her child's footsteps echoing in her ears. That night, she cried until her pillow was soaked. David grew bolder as time passed. He cut off her access to their joint accounts, leaving her scrambling to cover basic bills. He spread lies to friends and neighbors, telling them Naomi was unstable, that she had mood swings and couldn't care for the children properly. His parents supported every word, repeating the story to anyone who would listen. Naomi felt cornered, crushed by the weight of betrayal. She was tempted to give up more than once. But Rachel wouldn't let her. Document everything, Rachel told her firmly. Every text, every email, every word he says to you or the children. Don't fight with anger, fight with proof. So Naomi began to write. She filled notebooks with dates, conversations, details. She saved receipts, printed bank statements, and collected screenshots. Each piece of evidence became a brick in the wall she was building to defend herself. Even with Rachel's support, Naomi often battled despair. She felt the loneliness of fighting almost everyone she loved. At night, when the house was quiet, she lay awake thinking about her children, wondering if they would ever understand. But in the middle of her pain, something inside her hardened. For so long she had lived for others, for David, for his parents, even for her kids. Now she was learning to live for herself too. She wasn't just fighting for custody. She wasn't just trying to keep her home. She was fighting to prove that she mattered, that her voice, her worth, her existence could not be erased. Every insult, every betrayal, every attempt to push her down only fueled her fire. Naomi Carter, once quiet and underestimated, was no longer afraid. She would fight not only as a mother, but as a woman reclaiming her life. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was the beginning of her strength. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers and the echo of voices. Naomi sat at the plaintiff's table beside Rachel. Her palms pressed flat against her knees. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she kept her face steady. The testimonies had been long and tense. David's lawyer stood tall, his words sharp like knives. He painted Naomi as unstable and unfit, repeating the same lie that had been written in the divorce papers. He spoke about her emotional outbursts, her lack of career, and how she had no means to support the children. Every word felt like a slap, each one aimed to erase 15 years of sacrifice. Naomi's throat tightened as she listened, but she didn't break. She gripped the edge of the table, her eyes fixed on David. He sat with calm confidence, his suit perfect, his hair neat, his expression smug. His parents sat behind him, nodding along as if everything the lawyer said was gospel truth. When Naomi was called to the stand, the air grew heavier. She took the oath, then sat down, folding her hands in her lap. David's lawyer began firing questions, trying to push her into a corner. Mrs. Carter, is it true you have not worked for over a decade? Yes, because I was raising our children while my husband built his career. Would you agree that you rely financially on your husband? I relied on him, yes, because that's what we agreed when we started a family. Do you think you can provide the same quality of life as Mr. Carter? Naomi paused, then met the lawyer's eyes. I may not have his money, but I can provide love, stability, and truth, something money cannot buy. Whispers rippled through the room. Naomi felt her hands trembling, but steadied them quickly. Rachel gave her a small nod of encouragement. When David took the stand, his performance was flawless. He spoke smoothly about being a dedicated father, about Naomi being distant and unstable. His lawyer displayed a few cherry-picked texts, taken out of context, trying to show Naomi as angry or careless. David's parents sat straighter, looking proud of him. For a moment, it seemed like the courtroom leaned his way. But then Rachel stood. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. Your Honor, we have additional evidence to present. Naomi's breath slowed. This was the moment. The bombshell. Rachel began laying out documents, one after another. Bank statements showing hidden accounts. Transfers between clients' funds and David's personal accounts. Emails where he admitted to moving money. Witness statements from inside his firm, hinting at his late-night affairs with two colleagues. Gasps filled the courtroom. People leaned forward, eyes wide. Even the judge's brows lifted in surprise. Naomi turned her head just enough to see David's parents. His mother's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of pure horror. His father's face drained of color. David's mask cracked. He shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. "This is ridiculous," he said quickly. "These are lies, fabrications." But Rachel was ready. She held up one final piece of evidence, an email chain directly from David's work computer. His own words, proof of money taken and affairs covered up. "These are not fabrications, Your Honor," Rachel said firmly. "This is truth. Truth Mr. Carter tried to bury while destroying his wife's reputation." The courtroom buzzed louder. Reporters scribbled notes. Lawyers whispered to each other. Naomi sat still, her face calm, though her chest felt like it was on fire. David tried again, his voice rising. "This is taken out of context. She's twisting everything." But it was no use. The evidence was clear. His polished image, the one he had built for years, crumbled in front of everyone. The judge looked at him sternly. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Carter. Very serious." Naomi finally spoke, her voice steady though her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "I never wanted to destroy David. He is the father of my children. I wanted peace. I wanted fairness. But he tried to erase me. He tried to take my children, my home, my life. I had no choice but to fight harder." The words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, Naomi saw David's confidence collapse. He looked smaller, weaker, stripped of the power he once carried. Rachel placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder as the judge called for a recess. The outcome was no longer in doubt. Naomi sat tall, her chin lifted, her eyes forward. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't weak. She had faced the storm and turned it back on the man who tried to destroy her. And this was only the beginning. Naomi was granted custody of the children. The judge's voice was firm and final, leaving no room for doubt. She sat quietly as the words washed over her, tears pricking at her eyes, not from weakness, but from relief. After months of pain, fear, and endless battles, she had won the right to keep her children close. David, on the other hand, sat frozen. His lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but it was useless. The judge had also ordered an official investigation into the evidence Rachel had presented. His accounts were to be examined, and his license to practice law was suspended until further notice. The proud, confident man who once controlled every room now looked small and defeated. Behind him, his parents sat in silence. His mother, who had once smirked at Naomi's humiliation, now stared at the floor. His father's shoulders sagged, his face pale. The family who had thought Naomi was beneath them, who had tried to erase her, now had nothing to say. Naomi rose from her seat with quiet dignity. Rachel walked beside her, carrying the thick folder of evidence. But Naomi carried something heavier. Her pride, her strength, her survival. She did not look back at David or his parents as she walked out of the courtroom. She kept her head high, her steps steady, her heart light for the first time in years. At home, things began to change slowly. Her children were still distant at first, their young minds tangled in the lies their father had told them. But over time, they began to see the truth. They saw how their mother never gave up on them, how she fought for them when it would have been easier to walk away. One evening, her son sat at the kitchen table, fiddling with his spoon before finally saying, "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know everything. I thought." His voice cracked and he looked down. Naomi touched his hand gently. "I know," she said softly. "But now you do." Her daughter, too, began to draw closer. She watched Naomi work late at night on her sketches, designing buildings again like she used to in college. One night, she walked in quietly and asked, "Can I help?" Naomi smiled, handing her a pencil. They sat side by side, sketching lines on the same page, the silence between them turning into something warm and safe. Bit by bit, Naomi's children came back to her. They began to see her not just as their mother, but as a woman of strength, someone who had stood tall against lies, cruelty, and betrayal. Naomi also began to rebuild the pieces of herself she had once buried. She reached out to old contacts, dusted off her portfolio, and returned to the world of architecture. It was not easy. 15 years away from the field meant starting over. But this time, she was not afraid. She had faced worse battles than deadlines and designs. Her sketches grew bolder. Her confidence grew stronger. She worked late into the night, not out of desperation but out of passion. For the first time in years, she felt alive. as if the part of her that had been locked away was finally free. She was no longer just Naomi Carter, the quiet wife in the background of a wealthy family. She was Naomi, the woman who fought, the mother who protected, the architect who created. She had taken back her life piece by piece, and she wasn't done yet. Every day, she reminded herself of one thing: they had tried to erase her, but instead, they had given her back to herself. And Naomi Carter was never going to disappear again. Naomi sat at the desk in her new apartment, the soft glow of a lamp spilling across her sketchbook. Pencils and papers were spread out in front of her, filled with lines and shapes that slowly grew into buildings. It had been years since she allowed herself to dream on paper, but now the dreams flowed easily. Behind her, the apartment was quiet. Her children were asleep in the next room, their soft breaths filling the silence. For the first time in a long time, Naomi felt peace. It wasn't the grand house David had fought to take from her, but this little place was theirs. Safe, honest, filled with love. She paused, leaning back in her chair, and let her eyes wander over her drawings. A smile touched her lips. She had been broken once, but not destroyed. She had been underestimated, but not erased. Leaning closer to her sketchbook, she whispered into the still night, "They served me divorce papers, but I served them freedom." The words hung in the room like a quiet vow. She didn't just survive the war David started. She came out stronger, clearer, and freer. The betrayal that had nearly crushed her became the push that lifted her back into her own life. Naomi picked up her pencil again, her hand steady and sure. She was no longer just rebuilding her career. She was rebuilding herself. In that moment, Naomi Carter wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. And nothing, not David, not his family, not anyone, could take that away from her again. Hey loves, thanks so much for sticking around till the end. Don't forget to like, drop a comment, and hit that subscribe button for more. See you next time.